So as you had mentioned, Megs, there's significant large-scale organizational change often fails due to the complexities that I think often aren't accounted for. And as a result, that change is not sustainable. And you'd mentioned there in your response to the previous question, this idea of strategies, and you also mentioned teams. So let me ask you this. What are your strategies for boosting high-performing teams to accelerate teamwork in the workplace? Can you share any in terms of boosting high-performing teams specifically? What would that strategy look like, or strategies in order to do that?
Yeah, Jack, you're going right after the meat of a lot of this stuff. I think in this case, especially in today's VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, one of the ways that we can get efficient and effective around our work is around collaborating and working and operating, in teams. And so the idea of teams certainly isn't a new concept, but ways in which to boost so that they can be high performing. So there are several things that you want to take into consideration. One is the composition of the team, not only looking, functionally, but looking at experiences, background, divergent perspectives, and even thinking through some of the norms ahead of time for these teams. Consensus building is an important thing for teams, but also this idea of having divergent perspectives. We're hearing a lot today about this notion of psychological safety. And so what does that mean? So a high-performing team, if you want to boost it, you want to create space for voice, for people to bring up alternative perspectives. So some specific suggestions that I'll give when I'm working with organizations who want to have high-performing teams is I'll tell them to be very intentional how they create roles, and that when they're giving a team an assignment, that they should identify a divergent perspective. Have somebody play that role. Have somebody be constantly checking to say, bringing up the blind spots and taking the alternative view. And look, this is a hard role to play, but if you call it out as a specific role, it also makes playing that role a little bit safer in organizations. You can also have the consensus builder, the one to bring, but coming to consensus too quick is too hard. So finding a good lane of having a coherent way that the group works, but also having divergence in there. So if there were one nugget that I would say to boost high-performing teams is building out norms that allow for, learning from failure, smart risk taking, and building out roles to encourage divergent perspectives and finding blind spots.
So when when people talk about culture, in addition, when you talk about boosting high performing teams, it seems to me that the conversation can often be a bit ambiguous, invisible, maybe even abstract and subjective, especially when you talk about this idea of culture, right? But you just shared this idea of building out norms and understanding what those norms are. But how do you actually measure the effectiveness of these strategies when it comes to boosting high-performing teams? I mean, what's that proof in the pudding? How do you know? How do you take something that can often be a little bit subjective and abstract and just make it, something a little more concrete that you can bite your teeth into? How would I know as a CEO of an organization that I'm actually improving the performance of my teams? What does that look like? And what's the tools and tactics to gauge and measure that success?
Yeah, and thanks, Jack. I didn't really cover, the other part. When you're bringing groups or teams together, you want to have an output. And so really identifying and being very clear what that output of the team is and having, some tentative milestones. Those are really important to set up ahead of time so you're tracking progress along the way. And so that's another set of norms to build in and having, almost a regular, it's both a game plan, but it's almost, I love sports. It's almost like each quarter you should have some sort of, report on where's the score, where are we at? Mm-hmm. And knowing that, the progress is going to be just like in football, you're going up and down a field a little bit, there's going to be forward and backward. But it's really important to have some of those milestones and goalposts that are set up. I think the other piece that is important for measuring is identifying up front as you're pulling together these groups, asking whether it's, the CEO, the C-suite, or the teams themselves, what will this look like? How will we know we have an impact? And I think that critical question isn't often asked. Usually organizations are very focused on the task. Let's get this task done. Let's launch a new product, in the next 6 months that we can bring to market. They haven't thought through their metrics for success. So establishing those and building that in up front. So instead of just launching a new product in 6 months, it's, hey, 1 year from now, we're going to have increased our market share in selling trees, by 10%. And then knowing if, a team and accomplishing their tasks delivered that output measure. And so that's, connecting to the business metrics and identifying those upfront early on. I can't stress that enough. But it also is something that is not thought of. Organizations and business leaders are often thinking through breaking down the task and having a project management plan, and haven't thought through, hey, is this going to impact our sales growth, market to book ratio, our EBITDA, our
Exactly.
conversion rates? They just haven't come up with those yet.